You are listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. You're about to hear from an emergency physician who's been on the front line of the COVID spike in America's Southwest. And he has some things to say about masks.
You'll see techs and nurses and doctors and the people cleaning the floors and cleaning the rooms that the COVID patients were just in. And they'll wear their mask and then they'll take it off and they'll drink their coffee. They'll eat their donut. They'll get hot and they'll pull the mask down just below their nose, but they'll keep it on. Or my favorite is the ones that will pull it down to where the top lip is pointed out, but they'll wear it all day long and they'll occasionally pull it up, but leave it down.
In my latest dialogue with Dr. Joshua Dopko, we both had some information to share. This is part 2 of a series with the good doctor. The topic is masks on today's New Book of Daniel podcast. Hello and welcome to the New Book of Daniel podcast. My name is Daniel Bobinski, and I'll be your host on this adventure. If you've been reading my work over at UncoverDC.com, you'll know that last month I did a column on the Mask Fallacy. And I've been doing some research on mask efficacy for viral transmission, for preventing viral transmission. I've been listening to doctors around the country and even around the world. Been talking with doctors one-on-one too. And I just want you guys to know that I'm not anti-mask. I'm just anti-mandatory mask because the scientific evidence just isn't there. So what we're going to hear today is from Dr. Joshua Dopko. He's an emergency physician down in the southwestern United States, and he's been on the front line of the COVID battle down there, the COVID spike. If this is your first time listening to Dr. Dopko, I first connected with him back when this whole COVID thing started. I will put a link to that initial interview in the show notes below, as well as a short bio if you don't want to go back and watch all of that. But let's just jump right in now to our discussion about masks with Dr. Joshua Dopko.
The town I live in has mandated face masks. Our governor allowed communities to make that decision for them. The vast majority of communities are jumping on board requiring face masks. Some of them aren't. But our county, the county controllers, the commissioners were they were trying to decide on whether to mandate face masks countywide, and they asked for input. Our sheriff, who I really admire, he came out against it, not based on any medical of masks work versus masks don't work, but his point was that we are making a mandate that is going to be exceedingly difficult to enforce. And also with how everything is in the world of police relations right now, this might not be a good time to have to increase police interactions with citizens just over something like a mask. So he wanted to go more along education of recommending masks, and if we're called out to a facility, just educating them as to why it's important to encourage social distancing and masks, but no real enforcement of it. So that was his stance. I wrote a letter to the county commissioners opposing mandatory masks and my reasons behind it, and so they took that into consideration. 2 out of the 3 commissioners voted against mandated masks, and 1 of them voted for mandated masks. So in the county, there's not a mask mandate.
Okay, so before you go into it, let's just ask you yes or no. Are you comfortable sharing your reasons for not wearing masks?
Yeah, I'm not opposed to people wearing masks. I am opposed to the mandate for people to wear masks.
Okay, so you and I are on the exact same page with that. For those who don't know, I wrote an article at UncoverDC.com. It's called The Scientific Look at the Mask Fallacy and Why We're Told to Wear Them. Because I wanted to do an article on masks. I set out to do the research, pro and con. I mean, I did my undergrad, my master's, and all my doctoral work is done. And I've, like you, I've read more papers than I know what to do with. And you look at the pros and the cons, and I've taught debate to high schoolers before, so you learn to look at both sides of an issue. So I sat down to look at this from a pro-con and looking at the pro-mask research and the anti-mask research. And I came across this guy, kind of saved me hours of library research. He had already done the meta-analysis. He did the same thing that I was doing. He'd already done it. So I figured, why reinvent the wheel? He had done the analysis on all the extant studies on masks and their efficacy in viral transmission. And there's close to a dozen of them over the past 10, 12 years. None of them, zero of them show any statistical difference in mask wearing and not mask wearing. And so I included that in my article. You would not believe the amount of hate mail I received from that as well.
I can imagine.
Trying to kill people and trying to kill grandma. Like I'm just reporting the studies that the medical professionals had already done. And his criteria was he only looked at studies that were randomized controlled trials that had verifiable outcomes. So if we did up a masks and pro-mask, with mask, without mask, there had to be a verifiable outcome to where they tested the individuals for a actual virus in their body after wearing the masks or not wearing the masks. It wasn't just, did you get the sniffles last week? There was an actual medical examination conducted with a result. Those were the only studies he looked at. So here we have the chief medical officer in Idaho of one of the largest, health system in our state, on the phone to our Central District Health, and he's talking about these two hairdressers who both had COVID and how they went to work anyways, but they wore masks and none of their clients got sick, and there's evidence that masks work. I'm like, that's your scientific study, okay. Forget all the randomized controlled trials with verifiable outcomes. We're going to go with a couple of hairdressers.
Yes. Yeah, and they may not have passed it off even if they weren't wearing masks. Who knows? We don't know that.
Exactly.
So the thing that is frustrating about the masks is, and the mask mandates, here in my town, they have a mask mandate, but if you have a medical exemption, you don't have to wear one. I have a son who has profound autism. He's 17 years old, and we can't just leave him at home. He's been out of school. It drives him crazy. We have to get him out. He will go ballistic if we try to make him wear a mask. This is out of his norm. It's out of what he is used to. It's already causing him a lot of anxiety, not being able to see people's facial expressions. You know, it's hard for people with autism to even read people's emotions and social cues as it is. And then you put masks on everybody, that makes it more difficult. We've tried to put masks on him a couple times, and he does not tolerate it. And then also, being a creature of habit, if we ever did finally compel him to wear a mask, he'll be wearing a mask for the rest of his life. He will not want to get rid of it. And we've even had incidences in our hometown where my son has been verbally accosted and harassed by people because he's not wearing a mask in public. And so now it's got to the point to where it's socially acceptable. Not only that, it's virtuous to attack a child with disabilities because he's not wearing a mask. That's what this mask debate has turned us into, because you are literally killing people if you don't wear a mask. That is the kind of the mentality that they're sending to us, and people are buying it. If medical professionals honestly believe that, and you hear medical professionals are wearing masks, medical professionals are taking this seriously, you know, some of them are. I work with some nurses. I work with some physicians who, when they go to work, they get in the full gown. They look like they're getting ready to be blasted out into outer space. And they work like that all day long. I work with others who wear the N95 mask or the respirator mask, and they wear that most of the time. I then work with people who wear the masks when administration is looking. And these are stories I hear from all over the place and stories I have witnessed. I do work in other hospitals all over the state of Arizona. So it's not just a one hospital thing. You'll see techs and nurses and doctors and the people cleaning the floors and cleaning the rooms that the COVID patients were just in. And they'll wear their mask and then they'll take it off and they'll drink their coffee. They'll eat their donut. They'll get hot and they'll pull the mask down just below their nose, but they'll keep it on. Or my favorite is the ones that will pull it down to where the top lip is pointed out, but they'll wear it all day long and they'll occasionally pull it up, but leave it down. So I don't believe healthcare personnel are inherently evil. I don't think we want to kill people. I don't think that we want to purposely harm people. We don't want to spread COVID through our community. However, even in this setting, people are less than 100% with their masks. They'll let their nose hang out. They'll take them off to drink their coffee, to eat their donut. And if I honestly believed that wearing a mask would make the difference between saving the life of a patient versus them dying, we wouldn't be drinking our coffee at our workstation. We would not be taking our mask down while we're inside the building. We would either go 8 hours, 12 hours without a single drop of water, without taking a sip of coffee, or we would walk outside and drink it out on the ambulance bay if there was a slight break. Now, everybody's wearing masks when they go in to see patients, but there's not even 100% compliance with masks in the hospital setting. And I've even talked to people who work in ICU COVID units in Phoenix, and they admit to the same thing. But of course, you know, nobody's gonna come out on social media or a podcast and say that.
Except you.
Except me. Exactly. And so if we honestly believe that the masks were the be all end all of it, I think you would be a horrible person if you even took your nose out of it.
Sure.
But we're seeing all these medical professionals who wear it with various degrees of commitment. And, you know, so that's just something that's curious. And it also drives me crazy. I had a patient the other day, had CHF. He had a hard time breathing as it was. He's short of breath.
CHF for the non-medical folks means?
Congestive heart failure. So he has a lot of fluid on his lungs. But he's a patient in the ER. He has to wear a mask. So we make him wear a mask in the hospital. And the mask is over his mouth with his nose exposed so that he doesn't feel like he's suffocating. And we're all fine with that. And that just emotionally incensed me that I am compliant or complacent and mandating this man wear a mask, but I'm fine with him keeping his nose out. You know, if it was really that imperative, we would have demanded that he keep his nose covered.
Sure.
But he was barely tolerating having his mouth covered. Okay,
we're going to pause it right there. I do have a few more segments to go with this interview with Dr. Dopko. This next segment that's coming up, I think you're going to find interesting. I think we can all agree, though, that the goalposts are being moved with regard to COVID. We started off with 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and now here we are months later, and the restrictions being placed upon us are even more draconian than before. A special note are these mask orders that our government agencies are issuing, and you'll notice that they all have an exemption for Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have a health issue that you can't wear a mask, then you're exempt from wearing a mask. The problem is that we have private companies mandating that everybody in the store or in the place of business wear a mask. Also in government agencies like the DMV. I'm trying to figure out how a government agency can require everybody to wear a mask when in fact there's the Americans with Disabilities Act that some people can't. How are you supposed to get your driver's license renewed under those situations? There's a virus out there, and despite what people can say, you can't stop it. A virus is going to virus. In fact, Dr. Dopko just posted on his Facebook feed the other day that, if we would just let this thing ride for 60 days, we'd be done with it. Just open everything up for 60 days, let it happen, and we're over. But that's not going to happen, right? We've got new cases happening all the time. We need those new cases to get herd immunity, but they're not going to let that happen. Basically, what Dr. Dopko is going to be telling us is that we're kicking the can down the road, and it's going to be causing us big problems in the fall. That's going to be in the next segment. I would strongly encourage you to subscribe to the channel to make sure that you get notified when that happens. You have been listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of me or Dr. Dopko, you can send an email to newbookofdaniel@outlook.com. Anything coming to Dr. Dopko, I will forward on to him. You can also find me on Facebook, New Book of Daniel. This is facebook.com/newbookofdaniel. You can find me on Twitter and on Parler, both as @newbookofdaniel. I've got a blog out there, simply newbookofdaniel.com. And of course, you can find my writings at UncoverDC.com and also at Red State. My name is Daniel Bobinski. You've been listening to the New Book of Daniel podcast. I thank you for tuning in, and until next time, be blessed.